I am blown away. 70 field approvals. And I showed my wife one of your slides, and she said, "Oh, I would love that." And that's the seats, you know, the more comfortable seats. So anyway, as you all know, we're running behind. Steve's going to try to clip along. May I suggest that you write your questions down and save them for the end. He's also going to be speaking tomorrow more in depth on the specific STCs that or field approvals that he did. Today is more about how he went about it, what he learned from doing it. So, all right, Steve, we need a microphone for you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm really happy to be here. And like Brett said, he helped me a ton. I sent him just gobs of information, and he made a presentation that looks like we know what we're doing. And one of the reasons I'm here is when we're down in Oklahoma now restoring our Stinson. And I had never been to a Stinson gathering at all, and my wife was down, and we drove to Texarkana, and I met Jody down there, and I'd met Jody a number of years ago at Sun and Fun, and we just got to talking, and he asked me what was going on, and I told him some of the things. He goes, "You're coming to Quincy." So I said, "Do you think anybody's gonna, is it okay? Are they gonna even understand or care about what?" He goes, "Oh yeah, they will." Yeah. So I'm here. So anyway, let's see, I guess, is it the front?
Go left button.
This one here?
It should be this one up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So field approvals, kind of what is a 337 field approval, and what can it do for me? Those are some of the questions I'm going to answer for you. And do I need one? And then the key elements in securing. I think that's differences between a 337 and an STC. So I'm an owner restorer. I'm not a mechanic. I've got a 1948 Stinson. It's a -3. I bought it as a project in Las Vegas in 2004. I've been doing this for 16 years now, and it's one of those things where the more I got into it, the more I did it, and I can't help myself. You get into those tailspin things, and that's where you end up. And my home is in Seattle. I've been working on it in the Seattle area for about 10 years at a shop, and it just had sort of languished, and I needed to move ahead because I'm one of those aging pilots. And if I'm going to spend any time doing this, I've got to get going here. So we moved it to Central Arkansas Aircraft Repair. It's in Lone Oak, Arkansas, and Brian Staten is the ANPIA I'm working with, and he has just been great. His cousin is next door at AirTech, the covering and paint system. So those are the people that are helping me complete this thing.
Steve?
Yes?
Tell everybody your background. What ward you're in?
Oh.
So they understand.
Okay. So I'm an engineer by training, and that's part of the problem, or it's part of the solution. I don't know which one it is. But you sort of get into these things, and my whole goal in this thing, I started out wanting to restore this Stinson. And what it really got into it was, I said, what would a Stinson be if it were still in production today? For crying out loud, the Cessna 172 is, and our planes are better than a 172, so why not? So I looked at the Franklin engines. I really wanted a 180 Franklin engine, but I couldn't find one. And I'd been working with a guy at Univair by the name of Craig Baldwin, and he was the guy that did Jody's plane. That was the first one with the IL-360 in it. I thought, that's really what I ought to be going for. So I started down that road, and then I started my 337 thing, and I met this guy who's a PMI. He's Bill Reichert. And he's the one that encouraged me to continue on, because he said, Stinsons are great airplanes. They're bulletproof. There's nothing magic about them. There's no magic. And they're as good today as they were back in the day. And if you make them more modern, if we take more of the modern things we can do with fabric, epoxy covering, all this kind of stuff, there's nothing that they can't do. And that's kind of how I got this, and been at it for 16 years. But we're going to have a hopefully a fairly quick finish here, because it's really assembly now. So a field approval is basically an agreement with the FAA on what you're going to do to modify your airplane, and it's also a record of what you've actually done. So your plane will actually increase in value if you've got a really good paperwork history, and mine will have a really good paperwork history. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I did the 337s, because I never did a 337. I didn't know what even to do, and I'm going to tell you about my very first one. The very first one I did was considered a minor modification, and as an engineer, I look at things maybe just a little bit differently. But our fabric is fastened to the wings with PK screws. And normally people say, we're going to use stainless steel. That's the worst thing you can do. You should, if you're going to use PK screws, use steel. But I thought, not on my wings. After I took them apart, you could see where they'd wallowed out because they're rattling and shaking, and then they're also corroding because it's dissimilar metals. Wasn't going to do it. So I'm going to use rivets, because I had seen where they had used rivets on wings for Cetabrias. They had used rivets on wings for the Cessna 170, and that just made a lot more sense, since it's aluminum going into aluminum with an aluminum mandrel. So I went about figuring out how to do that. I called Univair. They had done the rivets on the pacers and the tri-pacers, so you could do, and they were made for that. So I started down that road, and I met Mr. Bill Reichert, PMI. I never met him for probably 6 or 7 years while we worked together. It was just over the phone. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, well, okay, you could, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Let's go ahead and write it up. So I did. I wrote it up, fill out a 337 form. I did that, packaged it all up, and sent it in to him. About 3 days later, he called me and he goes, Steve, I'm in receipt of your package. He said, it's very impressive. But he goes, Steve, I don't need 78 pages.
That's the engineer.
It was ridiculous. But having no knowledge, I didn't know. So he goes, have you ever heard of the Reader's Digest? I said, I have. He goes, I'd like to have the Reader's Digest version of this. He said, so I'd like it down to 1 page. I said, okay, whatever you want. And so we basically summed up what it was. I thought he wanted, structural strength of the type of aluminum rivet, shears, all this kind of business, and he didn't really want that. So, and I combined that with AirTech was the covering system that I was wanting to use, but we weren't on the AML. There wasn't even such a thing as an AML back then. So I had put down there that I would like to cover the airplane with AirTech. So I got my first 2 field approvals, and that was in 2006. And we just kept going on that. But it allowed me to make that change to this airplane. It's documented. You can put it. And the other thing that I'm doing, it's for me because it was what I wanted to do, but it's really for all of us, because it's about the Stinson. It's not about me. And so I'm giving it all away. I'm wherever I need to send it for everybody to have. So if you wanted to put rivets in your wing, you can use that 337 as an example, and all the notes and everything that I had done is behind that. So you'll be able to see that. It's a way to have a record to maintain your plane. But it also, what Mr. Reichert also told me was, he goes, Steve, when we're not around anymore, we want to be able to have the mechanic who's going to be looking after this plane to at least understand what we did, how we did it, to give him half a chance to make sure that we can repair it. And that's really what it's about too, but that becomes the record of how this airplane was maintained. There are also a whole bunch of rules. Car 3, everybody in this room, if you own a Stinson, you should have looked at Car 3. It's so darn important. That's the basis for the design of this airplane. Everything. All the control inputs, everything in there is Car 3. And it may be a little boring in some of the other stuff, but there's some really cool little tidbits in there. And I'm going to show you, like putting in a fuel valve. Can you use this? Can you use the one that Univer has? Yeah, you can. Now it says in there it can only be 165 horsepower. Well, I've got an approval that you can put 230 horse in. So those are the kind of things that will help modernize the plane when we use these modern techniques. I'm using a and air valve, and I've got a left, a right, a both, and an off. How did I do that? If you look at Car 3, it will tell you exactly how to do that. You have to have an interconnect that goes from the left tank to the right tank in a vent. And it will tell you exactly how to do that. Now what's interesting about it, the MAL aircraft is also a Car 3. And they have a left, a right, an off, and a both, and they don't have interconnects. So I don't know, sometimes the rules get kind of messed up along the way, but that's how you can do that kind of thing. When you use the Univer valve, it's a 3/8 internal with 1/2-inch hookups. The old valve was 1/2-inch hookups with a 1/2-inch internal. The and air valve is 1/2-inch all the way through, so you can really put anything you want in that. But I think it's really about the reliability factor, and a fuel valve is pretty important. You know, if it twists off in your hand, which has happened, it's not a good thing. Data that you use. Data can be from any place. The manufacturer, that's data. So when you go to the FAA with something, if you take data with you and you say, this is what I want to do. Here's an and air fuel valve. Here's a Odyssey battery. Here's whatever it is. This is the data that you can come with. And then there's approved data also. So if you have an approved manual, by the FAA, that's approved data by the FAA. My field approvals are not approved data, but they're data, and they've approved it. And it gets kind of mushy in there, but you can use those field approvals as examples, and it works. And especially, the thing I try to get across here is, and it'll come up in a little bit, the FAA folks, and I was talking to Dave James earlier, he has a really good working relationship with his FAA guy. And a lot of the FAA guys, we're losing it. Mr. Reichert retired in 2014. We lost a whole bunch with him. We've lost a whole bunch with other people. And nobody wants to be embarrassed. So if your FAA inspector comes out and doesn't know what a Stinson is, help him, educate him. Be ready with the Car 3. Show them where you can do this. Be their resource, because we're going to benefit from it. And that's the way I approached it. Once Mr. Reichert was gone, I did get Bill Shin, and Bill knows what a Stinson is, and they've come down and looked at the airplane and yada, yada, yada. But that doesn't happen to everybody. I got real lucky. I got more than lucky. But our job, if we want to keep flying these planes and doing that, is let them come and look at your plane. Even if you had some unauthorized, they won't know that. But if you want them to look at something that you have, we need to do this, let them look at it. Educate them, because that's going to help us all. It's not an STC. So an STC is a supplemental type certificate, and there are two types. There's a one-time, which is an enhanced 337. It's an enhanced 337. You're going to do this to your airplane, and you may not sell it, duplicate it, or anything else, but it's still data. Or you're going to do an STC that you're going to make money at and do those kind of things. I'm doing one last STC that I'm working on right now, and that's for an autopilot. So that'll be a one-time. But if somebody else wanted to do an autopilot in a Stinson, you could use this data and go to your FSDO, probably your ACO, the Aircraft Certification Office is where all the engineers work. And those guys have always been great to work with for me. But and there are rules to follow. You start at the top, you fill out the forms, and you just start down the list. And it does take time. It takes a lot of time. When I did the 390 conversion with the MT prop, that was 14 months I waited. And not only that, it was an incredible embarrassment to the FAA because Bill Reichert had to come back to me at the 9-month point and say, they lost your paperwork. Hopefully you kept it. I said I did, resubmitted. He embarrassed them into getting it done like quickly, and a couple months later I had it. So, do I need a field approval? There are logbook entries that you can do for things like fairings and things like that. An approval, that is the best decision that's made with your A&P IA and yourself. I would tend to always say to do a field approval, because one of the things that I have found out is they go, you don't need a field approval for this, thank you very much. And then you're off the hook because that becomes and of course that's that's an entry, no field approval needed. Is it minor or is it a major one? That is always the question. Usually if it's welding, it's considered a major unless there's something like seat belt. If it's a thing to hold a seat belt, there's aging aircraft and there's installing seat belts in antique or aging airplanes. They tend to kind of let you slide on that because they figure that something's better than nothing. My seat belt requirement was we put in a tube that created a landing for an inertia reel belt, and I put in a 5-point system that has a strap that comes up, and it is incorporated in with the seats. And in my thing tomorrow, I've got some show and tell. Brett asked me to bring some things, so I'll show you what the seat looks like. And the seat is, I took the measurements because I really liked it out of my wife's Jetta. It fit me really good, so we took the Stinson seat, modified it, and it has a little bit better back support and things like that. So this is what I was telling you about earlier. If you did one and you don't need one, great. It becomes a logbook entry. But it's never, I mean, they like field approvals and they like to know that they're kind of in charge. And that's one thing you got to do is when you go in for a field approval or you're working through this process, you need to keep asking them, what more can I get for you? What more can I do? Because you're going to have to do all the legwork. There's no question about it. And I'm hoping that since I've done so many of them, there won't be too many other ones that you need to go out and get. If I've learned one thing, it's do not do anything until you have that signed field approval in your hand. In your hand, signed. And here's what one looks like. It's very important to have this stamp right on the front here. And this is what one looks like. And this particular one was one of the more important ones that we got, and that was getting the Univair fuel valve approved for something more than 165 horsepower. And it will flow 26 gallons an hour. So it will work, they'll work really well for Stinsons. So a field approval allows you to legally make a change, modification, or a repair to your airplane. Most of the verbiage that I used, it was always a repair, and there was some kind of a safety feature to it. Fuel valve, pretty easy. I had articles and I printed them off and took them in. I don't want this to happen to me. You twist it and the pin that's in there rounds right off, and you're stuck. So there were a ton of those. The 5-point harness system was all easy to do, and that prevents you from meeting your instrument panel. It is a list of all the modifications. They have a copy of it. They've approved it. They're in your file, and it adds to the resale and the value of your airplane if you have them in there. And it can just make our older airplanes more livable. We've learned a lot since 1948. Materials have changed. There's a whole bunch of stuff we can do to make these planes even better. This is also true. It can be used as a basis, as data, for making a repair of it similar. So if you wanted to do a seat, if you wanted to do a different fuel valve, or any of the other things we've done, it can help you achieve that. One of the interesting ones is the 390 I'm putting in electronic ignition, and I got the field approval before Electro Air got their STC. And the way they got their STC is I sent them my field approval.
Wow.
So that was an interesting way to go. But they approved it because they had approved the IO 360. The IO 360 is exactly the same as the 390 except for the cylinders. The throw is the same, the crankshaft's the same, everything's the same. So it wasn't that much of a stretch, and it was only 10 more horsepower to do that. And there's kind of a factor in Car 3 that says if it's going to be about 10%, it should be approved because it still follows the same criteria. Boy, is that true. Our classic airplanes, my airplane is 74 years old, and it's one of the new, it's a serial number is 5221, so it's 39 from the end. And so it's one of the new ones, but that's an old plane. And I think to keep these things going, we're going to have to do the type of things that we need to continue to make them new again. So the process really starts out here. Review what you want, what you're repairing. What is it that you're trying to do, and be very specific about it. Get out all the garbage, because I know, because I used to kind of write them kind of generally. It's got to be specific. The size of bolts, size of nuts, everything in there. Review Car 3. What does Car 3 say about that? FAA website's really good for any kind of the ACs that you have to use. Your Form 337 can be printed off there. Submit to your PMI or your FSDO, or if your mechanic has a real good relationship, use it through him. I can tell you the mechanics don't like to fill out 337s. It's a pain. I've got the time, I'm going to do it. So I would help them and say, here, what verbiage do you like to use? Then waiting for the response. I told you about waiting 14 months for that one. It is time consuming. It is just flat time consuming. They are the least on their list of things to do. It's always at the end. If I have nothing to do today, and I'm a primary maintenance inspector, I'm going to do 337s. And invite the FAA to come and look at your plane. I asked Mr. Reichert, would he like to come and look at my plane, and he laughed out loud on the phone. I didn't think I would. He goes, Steve, I've been working here for 28 years. The first time anybody's asked me to come and look. Usually when I show up, it's kind of a dark day because I'm like, so he thought that was pretty good. So review what you're repairing. Car 3 review is important. FAA website will tell you it's a long trail. Form 337s, submit it, and then wait for the response. Don't cut metal, don't do anything until you got the signature, because you need that. Or you'll be disappointed too. I guarantee you, I always thought, oh man, this is a slam dunk. It was a while. And then invite them to come and look at your. So who approves field approvals? Well, this is my PMI, and this is me back in, I think that was probably around 2011, and this is Bill Reichert, and that's my plane. And I invited him down. He probably reviewed that airplane 2 or 3, maybe 4 times. And there was never a giveaway. I earned everything, but he also taught me a ton. He taught me how good these airplanes are. He was a Stinson fan. He had been a mechanic before he went to work for the FAA, and he always told me, he goes, if you're going to go into the trees, that's what you want to be in. That is a fact. And he gave me some reports. I saw a fatal on a Stinson, and they went into the trees. The pilot was killed and the passenger survived. And the cause of that accident was the sealing that they used around the air intake, and it came loose and went right into the throttle and came up like that. It was unapproved parts.
Wow.
And he told me time and again, these rules are written in blood. They're written in blood. Again, I can't overemphasize the reviewing of the Car 3. If you're going to get involved in this kind of thing, you really should know how your airplane is, what the design basis is. Ask the intelligent questions. Be knowledgeable, because they're not. All the people that have a lot of gray hair in the FAA have left. So now we're getting people that may have heard about it, but in Seattle, mostly people work at Boeing. There's big jets there, and they're not too concerned about the little planes as much. So be really informed. This is a key thing here. Write an overview, so you can introduce them to what you're trying to do. So it's not just a 337. With this thing came, I think it was a 3-page analysis of the valve. There's also been a guy who had a Stinson. He's a Boeing engineer. He did it's still out there. I've got copies of it. He did the approvals and got the STC-4 Univair for that valve. And he did then a 10-year update later, and he set his plane on an angle, backed it down a hill so he could show the climb angle and how much the fuel would drain by itself with a 5-inch head and all this kind of stuff. It worked, and he was the one who gave the STC-2 Univair. This one right here, this approval, I sent it directly to Univair when they got it. I don't know why they haven't shown that these valves can't do more than 165 horsepower. It's a great valve for 180 horse, or even I have it up through the 0470. Any and all data. Think outside the box. Catalogs, anything that gives specifics. If you have engineering drawings, even if you need engineering things, there are things to do. One of the examples I use is you do not have to be an engineer to figure out things about how our planes are made. This is a book that was written in 1941, and it's an engineering manual, and it shows the values of every tube in our plane. Tensile strength, the yield strength, and the torsional strength. It's right here. And there's our plane that tells everything about what's in our fuselages. So I replaced 40% of the tubes in my plane. and none of them were corroded. But I didn't know that until I cut them out. So those are the kind of things that you kind of go, well, I guess that's what we're going to do then. And I have an example that I'll share maybe tomorrow if we have time on one specific thing to replace so I could put the seat belts and separate them from the seat itself. So right now the Stinson has shared hookups. So the Stinson seat and the seat belt are on the same. So I separated those out because I didn't like the idea of it sharing. Plus I also went with NAS fittings and 5/16 for all seat belts because I don't longer meet the 170-pound criteria. I know that may come as a shock. And it was 190 pounds with a parachute. And those seats, and you look in car 3, it'll show you exactly how it was designed. But I can show this, and your basis is car 3. So when you're replacing a member in that airframe, you start at a known quantity. So if it's a 1/2-inch tube that has 35 wall, and you change it to a 1/2-inch tube that has 49 wall, how much stronger is that? 30% in all areas. So just a slight change like that can make just a huge difference in your whole airframe. And that's the kind of information that the FAA would, the ACO anyway, would get from me. And this is very true too. The follow-up you have to do, you have to become slightly annoying. Not overly annoying, just slightly annoying. I beg your pardon?
Slightly is the key.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They know they know your name. Learn from them how the game is played. Phraseology is so dang important. The phraseology that they want. Mr. Reichert, I would write him a thing and he'd come back, it'd be all crossed out, use this word, and he'd send it back to me. I was back doing it just what he wanted. Whatever he wanted was what he got. Whoops. The hardest part is waiting. The hardest part is waiting. I've still got one out there. I'm on 3 years. It's the EarthX lithium battery. And I used to design lithium battery systems. It's the safest chemistry out there. It's way safer than lead. Safer than lead. The Odyssey battery is a great battery, but it weighs 15 pounds. The EarthX weighs 5, and instead of being 16 amps, it's 31. And it will start, you could taxi, I mean, I think you could almost get into flight with the starter. The invitation should always be there for them to come and look at your plane, because that every time that they do that, that's an education. It is so important. I can't overemphasize that. Plus, they kind of like to get out of the office, but I do know that there has been some changes since COVID. The working remote kind of thing, that has been a problem. The Max was a problem. The lithium battery that burned up in the Boeing airplane was a problem. That was lithium cobalt. Lithium cobalt you cannot control. It's not lithium iron phosphate. That's the most benign thing you can have. But all of those things trickle down to us with 70-plus-year-old airplanes, which makes no sense. Here are just I'm going to quickly go through my top upgrades. So the first thing is passenger restraints, attach points and bolts. This is the back seat. You can never get to it. That's a quarter 24 nut plate, and so now you can use that. This piece right back here is where the back seat hookups in the back. They're the ones that are such a problem. You can't get the bolt in because the floorboards are there, so you make them 1 inch taller. Add shoulder harnesses front and back. Rear seat belt outside, that's what this nut plate is for. And the and raising that piece there 1 inch is really helpful. And then separating the seats and the seat belts. And again, going to NAS fasteners, the bolts there, you know, you go from typically around 95 to 100,000 pounds to about 165, maybe 185, depending on the type of bolt. So it keeps a larger frame guy like me in the seat. Fuel valve upgrades, that's this is the and air valve, left, right, both and off. And it has still the extension with the tube. The Univar valve does meet the requirements to run off larger horsepower engines. It's a 1/2 inch valve, 3/8 internals, and then the and air. And these are the things. Every one of these things can be done to a Stinson without having to do a complete crazy overhaul, rebuild like I'm doing. Front seats. I've got my seats here. I was going to show those tomorrow at the thing, so you can see that they're attached to the airplane in 2 different spots. All the other seats only got one attachment to the airframe. I raised the seat backs as well, and it increased the rearward travel. My legs are a little short, but I'm long in the torso, so I only had mine come back about another inch, maybe 1.25 inches, which is fine for me. You could take and use that and just extend it out a little bit more with a square tube. The other thing is that my seats, to take them out, you push them forward, not back, because they would fall into the back seat, especially if that 1/2 inch piece there bent or anything like that, and you can't control the plane from the back seat. Bent flap handle. So this is in Bob Picard's plane. I brought a bent flap handle so you can see what it looks like. The guy that makes them, they're beautifully done. He will take your flap handle from you and he will return to you a modified flap handle. There is still parts that are in it, but that allows you to you're never doing this to get to the flap handle. It's right there, and you just 2 strokes and you're up. Awesome. Don't have to, you're not loosening your shoulder harness. My old man handles, so I don't like to bend over. So these are right near where the vertical fin starts right here, and there's a cross member right there, and they're pretty good size. I did a real scientific thing. I put the biggest glove I could find, and I went like this, and we drew around it. And they're the same size as the longerons here, so they're 5/8. So they're a real good handle to hold on to, and you can easily pull the plane around or help tie it down. No bending over. So I'm up in Seattle area. It's really gray up there when you fly around. I mean, we can fly around with a 6,000 foot ceiling and it's raining. So it's C and B scenes. So I've got wingtips and strobe in the back. I've got a top and bottom strobe that are red, and the position lights, and then I've got landing light and taxi light in both wings, so I can do the wig-wag thing, so I'm as lit up as you can be. And my wife picked blue. Our Stinson was blue, so it's going to be that dark blue that blends in with everything that you can't see. So that's the reason that we want to have as much light on there as possible. This is a great battery to put in the plane. It's a non-vented. It's actually an approved battery. If you do, I know Dave did the PC 680. This is the approved version. Here's the model number right here. And like he said, if you can keep all those lines really, or the wires really short, that really helps. I will get we'll get the EarthX approved. The problem that they're looking at is it's for firewall forward, but what's interesting is this battery, which is approved and have been in many Stinsons, has less tolerance for heat than the lithium. And I can't quite get them to understand that yet, but we're working on it. The other thing was the parking brake. So this is my fuselage here. The parking brake, we put in this tube right here, and it hooked up to this tube. These are square tubes, and it's made for a Cleveland parking brake. You can do a clamp in place or a weld in place, but you don't have that funky little where you're pushing on the brakes and you're pulling the thing and it doesn't work. These are solid. I mean, it won't go anywhere. The other thing that's happening is in a lot of Stinsons you'll see where the step socket has started to fail, and that's because they were designed for 170-pound people and they're 74 years old. So what we did there was we took a patch and we put it on either side, but it also engages here and here now. So you're getting engagement all the way along there, and they will not fail. You can jump on that thing. If anything, it would bend the tube. Fuel tank improvements. That's me doing. Have you ever looked at inside your fuel tanks? They're 74 years old. So I took the tops off mine. It was a horrific experience because I started out with 2 perfect tanks. And by the end of the day, I had 2 worthless tanks because I took the top off. You know, you're sitting there going, what the heck did I just do? But it was a way to clean them. It was a way to look inside, change the flapper valve. We used Monel welding wire for the hinges. And we found one spot in one fuel cell that had a little pinhole, just starting. And what we did was we cleaned it all, clean. And then we heated the whole bottom of the tank up and just dropped a piece of weld in there when it was about 400 degrees. 400 degrees for aluminum is a very, very critical temperature. And then it just goes like that, and you could never see it. There's a little bright spot, but then we acid etched it, alodined it, and then you'll see, and I'll show you these little spots here. Those are nut plates where we screwed nut plates down. And the top that we took off was 40 thousandths. The top I put on was 50, and it gives a much nicer airfoil shape, and it's much stronger. And I know my tanks are clean. And we pressure tested it. Actually, we pressure tested at 3.5 psi. It only needed 2.5. It did pop, but it made some noise, but it didn't do anything. One more time.
Did you leave the fuel filler next to the original location?
Maybe. I moved them about that much to the outside, so I'm figuring I got another 3 gallons or so in there. And then I also have an auxiliary fuel system, which I'll talk about tomorrow too. One of the things that we're doing to our Stinsons, and these are for the guys that have more horsepower. These engines, or these airframes were made, the airframe is not the problem, it's the other parts. It's more horizontal stabilizer for one. They crack, especially when they have a 0470 in them and they're on floats. And you have to put your mirror in the back and look back at it and you'll see the crack. John Hansen will build you a spar. The Univair one ends just before the bolts, which is crazy. I don't know why they would do that. You need one that goes out a little farther that incorporates the attach points there. And you want to make them a little bit thicker. I wouldn't recommend, I did 32 thousandths on mine. If you did 25, that would be great. And the guy that made it for me was Billy Carter. He's a real big Stinson guy. Flapskins, I made those out of 25 thousandths Cessna skins, and I brought one and I'll bring it in tomorrow and show it to you. Top and bottom fairings, so I ran the aluminum, where they run them about this far over the cabin top. I ran it back 44 inches because when you're moving that much air, so I've got an 82-inch MT prop on there, it's going to move way more air than a 76-inch fixed pitch propeller. and it just beats it. And if you watch the demonstration today with Jody's plane, you watched that tail back there? So what happens is on a Stinson where they attach, it's about that wide. And it has no wires out there to support it. And if you think about the twist that's going on back there, that's why I replaced the longerons in the plane, because the twisting motion on the whole airframe. So I went from 35 thousandths wall to 49 on all 4 longerons. That gives me 30+% more in all facets of the strength. And I hope that mine will not do that as much. And with 32,000 skin, it's noticeably heavier. The horizontal is. Then you have to worry about the drumming, that fabric drumming. I mean, it will beat itself to death on some of these big airplanes. You have an 0470 on a float plane or that big, they got an 84-inch prop on them. That's a load. That is a load of air coming back there. There's drumming on the bottom of the wings. I haven't quite figured out what to do about that yet, but there is a process called double covering, where you put about this far out to whatever bay it is, I can't remember, a very, very large tape. It's about that wide. So you put a light fabric on that, and that really strengthens up over the normal covering. And then I opted to do a field approval for the 0470 STC that puts a large piece right down the middle of the cowling, so you don't have just a hinge out there. It's a very substantial piece, as you well know, and that makes all the difference in the world. So when you've increased the horsepower, the pulse is hitting that cowling, hitting the windshield, all that stuff. You know, it was made for a 165 Franklin, which is a good engine, and it produces a lot of thrust, but not like these more modern ones, especially using the bigger propellers. And there was a video made by this guy that came by to see Robbie. This is Robbie Staten right here, owner of AirTech, and that's my plane in the back. And he made this thing, and Brett got a hold of it and put that up there, and that's how that thing got there. So, any questions, comments, concerns, anything? Yes, sir.
I'm curious, your opinion on, a lot of people have filed a notch in their flaps so that they have an extra notch between them.
Right.
No flap and first notch.
Yep.
Is that a no approval? Is that a local issue? Is that a worry about it?
To be legal, you need a 337 on it. Yeah. And I saw, who was it? Somebody here had one. I just saw it. And what you do is you turn that so the aileron is down all the way, and you match the flap up for that, because that will be your biggest amount of lift. Where it is now, I think they're 15 and 33 degrees, right? This one would be like right in the middle, and it does make a huge difference on floats. I don't know if it makes that much of a difference on land planes. And if you have any amount of horsepower more, I don't really think it makes that much difference.
Is that one of the field approvals you've gone after?
I have not. I don't. What I was more concerned about was, and I'll show you this tomorrow, I made the flap stronger, because what you see, and I can describe how it actually stretches the metal over a period of time. I believe the flaps that I saw were 16 thousandths. That's a pretty thin piece of aluminum, and it'll actually start stretching it so that it has kind of almost a cupped effect. And so now you're starting to lose that, and the metal doesn't like to stretch, and it will crack after a while. Well, I use Cessna skins, which are, they're the peak, not the divoted kind, and that's a much more robust way to construct that. But we didn't know that, 74 years ago. Sure.
Did you ever hear of a flap cable breaking?
I have not.
Very big cable.
No, they're like 1/8 inch or something like that. They're not very big at all. Yeah, I did know of an aileron cable that broke, But where it broke, it was interesting because I couldn't believe that it actually happened. And I was living in California at the time. I went to see the guy, and it looked to me, I mean, I've seen a lot of metallurgical phenomenon, but this looked to me like somebody had been welding, and somehow they had touched that cable because it was like a little melted piece right there. And nobody knew about it. And he's flying one day, and all of a sudden, there's nothing going on here now, and he had to land it, and it was a Crossman, and it was pretty touchy, but he got it down. Everything, it all turned out well, and he had a Y yoke in there too, and I've got a Y yoke too, so I can get a full center stack in, and that, but it broke in the saddle down here is where it broke, but you could see where some anomaly had happened to that cable. I don't know what it was.
I had a flat cable break on 195. Had a case of flap.
Oh,
If I had to just put the flaps back up, the cable thing
yeah,
was uncontrollable.
yes, yeah, wow, that's
And I was 400 feet high.
that's a serious time to do that. Any other questions? So I'll do this tomorrow again, and I'll just have a whole bunch of pictures that we can walk through. And if you have any questions, I can stop and look at them. If not, we can just kind of go on. And they're all what I would say are good things to look at in your Stinson. And I would not recommend doing what I did and do them all, pick and choose. Thank you very much.
Awesome, Steve.